There's a man who works at a library in a town you've probably never heard of. He's been there for 19 years. He knows where every book belongs, can recommend something for any mood, and has a small garden behind his apartment where he grows tomatoes that he gives to his neighbors. When his friends from college visit, they always ask the same question with a kind of worried gentleness. Are you happy here? And he always says yes. But they don't quite believe him. We live in a culture that has made ambition a moral quality. Dreaming big isn't just encouraged, it's expected. It's the plot of every movie, the arc of every commencement speech, the subtext of every family dinner where someone asks what you're doing with your life. The assumption is so deep we barely notice it anymore that wanting more is healthy, that scaling up is growing up, that the size of your dreams reflects the size of your spirit. But there are people who don't dream big. Not because they've failed at it, not because they're afraid exactly, not because they've given up. They just don't. Their ambitions are modest. Their goals are specific and small. They want a garden, not an empire. A good dinner, not a legacy. A quiet life that fits them correctly. And something interesting happens when you pay attention to these people, when you stop trying to fix or inspire them. You start to notice that the psychology underneath isn't what we've been taught to expect. Most explanations for modest ambition treat it like a symptom. Low self-esteem, fear of failure, childhood wounds, a defensive crouch against disappointment. And sometimes, sure, that's part of it. There are people whose small dreams are really just collapsed big ones. You can usually tell there's a flattened quality to their voice when they talk about the future, a resigned kind of okayness that sounds like something else underneath. But that's not everyone. There's a different kind of person who doesn't dream big, and their psychology is far more interesting than our cultural narratives allow for. Because what if modest ambition isn't always a failure of courage? What if it's sometimes a different kind of wisdom? Think about what's required to dream big. You need a particular relationship with the future. You have to believe that wanting something very much will bring it closer. You have to trust that effort compounds, that sacrifice pays off, that the world is enough of a meritocracy to reward your vision. You need a tolerance for delayed gratification that can stretch across years, sometimes decades. You need to be able to hold an image of a distant self and care about that person more than you care about your present comfort. Not everyone has that wiring, and not everyone wants it. Psychologists have noticed something curious about how people experience time. Some individuals have what researchers call a steep temporal discount rate. That's jargon for a simple idea. The future feels less real to them. Not in a short-sighted or impulsive way necessarily. More like what's happening now has a weight and substance that what might happen later just doesn't. The present isn't a stepping stone. It's the whole path. For these people, a dream that requires 10 years of striving doesn't feel exciting. It feels abstract, unreal, like planning for a life that belongs to someone else. The sacrifice required doesn't compute because the reward is too far away to feel like a reward. But here's what's easy to miss. That's not the same thing as lacking discipline or vision. It's a fundamentally different way of organizing value. And there are trade-offs that go both ways. The person who doesn't dream big often has access to something the ambitious person doesn't, a kind of attentiveness to what's actually here. They notice the texture of the present because they're not looking past it toward some better version. They can sink into an afternoon. They can be satisfied by small completions. Their happiness doesn't depend on becoming someone else. There's a phrase that comes up sometimes in psychology, the hedonic treadmill. It describes how people adapt to new circumstances, how achievements that once seemed life-changing become the new baseline, how we always recalibrate our expectations upward. Dream big, get big, want bigger. People who don't dream big often step off that treadmill without even realizing there was one. Not because they're enlightened, just because the treadmill never appealed to them in the first place. But culture doesn't have much room for that. We've built entire industries around the assumption that everyone secretly wants more and just needs permission or technique or confidence to go after it. Self-help, motivational speaking, productivity optimization. All of it rests on the idea that ambition is the default human setting, and anything less is a problem to solve. So when someone says, "I'm happy with my small life," we hear it as a defense, a cope, a story they tell themselves because the truth is too painful. We think we're being kind when we try to inspire them. We think we're seeing potential they can't see in themselves. But sometimes we're just projecting. Sometimes we need them to want more because their contentment makes us uncomfortable. It suggests that the race we're running might be optional, that the striving we've organized our lives around might not be as necessary as we thought. There's a cognitive bias researchers have studied called the false consensus effect, and we assume other people think like us more than they actually do. We use our own mind as the template and then make adjustments. So if you're someone who dreams big, someone whose happiness is tied to growth and achievement and becoming, it's almost impossible to imagine that another person might be wired differently at the foundation. You assume they must want what you want. They're just blocked somehow, scared, limited, and maybe you're right sometimes, but not always. Here's where it gets more complicated. Childhood does shape the scope of our ambitions, but not always in the ways the conventional stories suggest. You'd expect that people raised with encouragement and resources would dream bigger, and often they do, but not always. Sometimes growing up with a lot of stability produces the opposite effect, a deep appreciation for what stability feels like and a wariness of anything that might threaten it. If your childhood was predictable and safe, you know exactly what you'd be risking by chasing something bigger. You know what enough feels like. Conversely, sometimes people who grew up with very little dream enormous dreams. The lack becomes a fuel. But other times, scarcity teaches a different lesson, that the best strategy is to secure what you can, protect it, and not gamble on more. There's no clean equation. Two people can have the same childhood and walk away with opposite orientations toward ambition. What matters more than the circumstances is the story you made out of them. And that story gets written quietly, usually before you have the language to know you're writing it. Some people learned that the world rewards boldness. Others learned that it punishes exposure. Some people learned that wanting things brings them closer. Others learned that wanting is where the pain starts. And here's the thing that makes this so hard to talk about honestly. Both groups have evidence. The world really does sometimes reward boldness. And it really does sometimes punish it. There's no objectively correct level of ambition. It's not like one group has it right and the other is deluded. But we talk about it like there is. We've made dreaming big into a virtue, and modest dreams into something you settle for. There's a particular loneliness that comes with not dreaming big in a culture that worships ambition. It's the loneliness of being misunderstood in a very specific way. People think they know what you need. They want to help you overcome whatever's holding you back. They give you books about unleashing your potential. They tell you stories about people who started with nothing and built empires. And you can't quite explain that you don't feel held back, that your life isn't a compromise, that you're not waiting for permission to want more. You just don't want more in the way they mean it. So you learn to nod, to say maybe someday, to let them think you're still finding yourself, still figuring it out, still on the verge of some larger becoming, because that's easier than trying to translate a completely different way of being happy. But something gets lost in that translation, a kind of legitimacy, the possibility that your way of moving through the world is just as valid, just as fully realized as theirs. Psychologists sometimes distinguish between two types of well-being, hedonic and eudaimonic. Hedonic is about pleasure, comfort, satisfaction. Eudaimonic is about meaning, growth, self-actualization. The research tends to privilege eudaimonic well-being. It's seen as deeper, more substantial, more truly human. But that hierarchy might just be another story we tell. Another way of saying that the examined life, the striving life, the ever-becoming life is superior to the one that's content with what it already has. What if that's wrong? What if there's a kind of meaning that doesn't require constant growth? A kind of satisfaction that doesn't need to be justified by achievement? The person who doesn't dream big might have access to something the rest of us have lost. The ability to be here fully, without treating it as a stepping stone to somewhere else. That's not resignation. It's not defeat. It's a completely different relationship with being alive. And maybe that's what makes us so uncomfortable, not that they're missing out, but that they found a way to stop running that we haven't figured out yet. That their small life might actually be bigger in the ways that matter than our endless pursuit of more. The library worker with the tomato garden, he's not a cautionary tale. He's not stuck. He built a life that fits. And every time his friends ask if he's happy, what they're really asking is, how can you be happy without wanting what I want? How can this be enough? And he doesn't know how to answer that because, for him, it just is. It always has been. There's no lesson at the end of this. No call to dream smaller or bigger. No prescription for the right amount of ambition. just a recognition that the size of your dreams might not be the measure of your depth. That contentment and ambition aren't a spectrum with one end better than the other. They're different paths, and the people walking them aren't lost. They're just going somewhere else. And maybe that's worth noticing, not fixing, just noticing.